in from the waiting room. We'll get started in just a minute. Hope everybody's enjoying the sunny day today. Still a bit chilly. The sun is much appreciated. So Jonathan, I'll just wait for a thumbs up from you and I'll, all right. We'll dive right in. Welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining us today for our community conversation about stormwater. We're very excited to have our Public Works Director and City Engineer Shannon Holmes here today. As always, this I've got my little Mario here with us. He's gonna say hi. So as always, we're recorded. We're going live on Facebook. I'd ask our guests to mute and then put questions as they come up in the chat, and we'll have plenty of time to get to those. So I'll do a quick introduction, and then we're gonna do a very short video on stormwater, and then I'll pass it over to Shannon. So most of you know I'm Michelle Uvaraga. I serve as PCEC's Executive Director. Park County Environmental Council, we are your community grassroots conservation group working to protect the water, lands, and wildlife here in Park County. And we do that through grassroots organizing, advocacy, and education all across the county. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are all living, and Park County is traditional homeland of the Epsiloka or Crow tribe, who have lived and continue to live here for decades, and that Europeans came to Montana in the late 19th century and still live here, and that we all value and love this place, and we're committed to working together to protect it for the next 7 generations. All right, with that, I am going to, well, I think what we'll do before I introduce Shannon, we're gonna watch a very quick video on stormwater. Sorry guys, I'm juggling a bit and I don't have my notes, but we'll kick off our video and then we'll pass it over to Shannon, and I'll do an intro then. Here it comes. Thank you, Jonathan.
As an arriving storm stirs Main Street, you're about to witness one of Bozeman's growing challenges, one in which each of us can make an immediate difference. Within minutes of rain arriving, people are jumping over puddles and running for cover. Unable to soak into hard surfaces, rain is flowing off everything to drains and into a system of underground pipes. It's happening all over our growing city as we replace our natural sponges, open lands that absorb rain and snowmelt, and wetlands that hold water for us, with impervious surfaces that stormwater can't soak into. The good part of Bozeman's stormwater system is it protects our homes and businesses by moving water away from foundations and reduces the chances of flooding. The bad part is water running across hard surfaces picks up whatever has accumulated.
All the pollutants that exist on the city surface, like oils and greases, fertilizers, dog waste, trash, sediment, all that stuff gets taken with the water.
Where the accumulated pollution goes is crucial. The pipes inside our storm drains are separate from our sewer system. Stormwater does not go to a treatment plant. It flows directly to our local streams and ponds. At stake is the health of places Bozeman residents cherish, where we introduce kids to water, exercise our dogs, and renew ourselves in the presence of fish and wildlife. Places like Story Mill, not just enhanced by water, but defined by water, where you might see much more than deer, like trout spawning in the East Gallatin River, or a muskrat heading out on his evening rounds. With these hallmarks of Bozeman in mind, Kyle Marins of the city's Stormwater Division wishes we could all see what sometimes pours from outfalls like this one.
A black sludge coming out of the pipe. And that black sludge is the result of sediment and trash, fertilizer, grass clippings. It's very shocking. It's something that everyone should see, because if you see it, it's going to dramatically change the way you say manage your yard. Because once you establish this connection in your mind that what I'm doing in my yard or driveway or road in front of my house is going to end up here and end up in this water resource, it's alarming and it's frankly disturbing.
The city hopes each of us will think about stormwater like Bozeman resident Amber Zander is as she traces where oil-laced runoff is going. Or as Lauren Waterton is. On a shining day on Pete's Hill, she and other volunteers of the organization Run Dog Run are picking up what dog owners have missed in preceding months. Waterton says the key is recognition.
You know, that everything that we leave on the ground eventually ends up in our watershed, and you know, whether it's our dog's poop or anything else, litter, trash, things like that, that it all affects the water quality here and downstream.
The city's dog stations do make an enormous difference. Here's how much was scooped up and placed in the provided bins in 2016.
So that's Pete's Hill.
The red circles are roughly 6,000 pounds of dog waste. Orange, 3,000 pounds.
You can see where the waste is being picked up. It's along Bozeman Creek.
Bozeman Creek is beautiful, but it has an E. coli problem from dog waste. There are still too many dog owners not heeding the signs and doing their part.
And we can solve this. Just pick up the poop.
City workers do many different things, often with fascinated audiences, to keep our underground system capable of moving water when it needs to. Here, with a giant vacuum, they're sucking out accumulated pollutants, stuff that got into the streets from our landscapes and driveways. Now they're easing a remote control camera into the manhole, guiding it into clay pipes that are up to 90 years old. This is how they identify sections of pipe that are cracking so badly they could fail.
You can get to something before it turns into a disaster.
So the markings you see in your neighborhood are where they go in and replace, say, 20 feet of pipe to avoid water getting out and creating a sinkhole, which would be dangerous and require much greater expense. Each fall, we see the massive leaf pickup operation when crews clear up to 1,000 tons of leaves. What most of us don't see is what gets vacuumed out of the system and disposed of in a better place. Crews aren't judgmental, but they hope residents realize it's impossible to intercept everything headed to the creek. So the health of our streams really depends on us.
Even your grass clippings that you mow and you blow into the curb line, you know, the nitrogen in the grass gets in the creeks, and that's not good for the fish and stuff in the creeks. So just be aware of what you're putting in the curb, because it's going to end up in the creeks. Unless I can get to it first.
The city says small actions by each of us will make a big difference for our streams, like sweeping clippings and fertilizer off hard surfaces, fixing that leaky vehicle, and putting in landscapes that allow stormwater to soak in instead of racing to the nearest drain. Even hardscapes, thanks to the innovation of permeable pavers, can allow water to soak in. We can have the benefits of hard surfaces in our patios and driveways, alleyways and parking lots, while also reducing stormwater runoff.
What do trout eat? Bugs, that's right.
At Sacagawea Middle School, students are envisioning how everything adds up.
Bugs like to live on rocks, like small gravel. But if you cover all that small gravel with sediment, the bug habitat is gone, so the fish lose their food source.
There's a lot of grassy areas, so there's probably fertilizer on them.
This is all the storm drains in the East Main Street right here.
With parks laid out on the hallway floor and plastic beads and Tootsie Rolls to symbolize fertilizer and dog waste, they're simulating a rainstorm.
Push that pollution down the river. This is not getting treated.
The cumulative effects of that, shown really well in today's lesson by bringing the park pollutants altogether.
It's things that when I was growing up in Wisconsin, we didn't talk about.
It's hopeful, he says, thinking that one of these kids may be a future city engineer or mayor of Bozeman. In the meantime, the city asks that we all stay tuned because it plans to keep talking about how each of us can help reduce the impact stormwater is having on our local streams.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan, for putting that up. So that's our quick primer on the importance of stormwater. And then we have a real live city engineer here to talk more about what's happening in Livingston. And, we've been hosting these Zooms to talk about issues in our community as we're seeing more and more growth here in Southwest Montana, especially in Park County. It's a trend that's been happening for years and really has increased with the pandemic. So the goal for us and for these conversations is to bring our community members together, talk about the issues, identify solutions, and how we can all have a shared language when we're advocating for this place in the future we want to see. And Shannon Holmes, who is our Public Works Director here in Livingston, he's been he's not only Public Works Director, but he also serves on the Livingston Planning Board. So for those of you that have been following along with that tremendous effort, Shannon has been participating in night meetings for months probably now, like back to back, often city commission meetings and then planning board meetings. And it's just been, an incredible public servant and a wealth of knowledge about all the issues related to public works and a really strong voice for the Yellowstone River, which is something that we all deeply care about. And Shannon's been in that job for 8 years, and we're really grateful for his service and really thrilled to have him here today to talk to us more about Livingston Stormwater, what we've got now and what's coming as we grow. So I'll pass it over to you, Shannon. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle and Jen and Jonathan, for inviting me to provide some more insight into stormwater, specifically the stormwater for Livingston. I'll be the first to admit that's a tough video to follow. The city of Bozeman did an excellent job of really bringing stormwater close to home and putting it in a perspective that I think most people can relate to. So, stormwater is something that really is, as this slide says, is the forgotten utility in Livingston. We have obviously a very established water, sewer system, transportation system, solid waste and park system, but stormwater is something that hasn't really been a priority for Livingston until the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years. So myself and Martha, who Martha works in the Public Works office, is our project manager. She put a lot of this presentation together, and we presented this to the City Commission in the fall of 2020. Stormwater is something that is included in the city's strategic plan, and I know it's something that's been important for city administration, PCEC, and other local entities for a while, and it's certainly going to be included in the growth policy, and hopefully the City Commission will accept and approve the recommendations that are included in the growth policy. So my presentation, again, it's something that we gave to the commission last fall. There will be some overlap in the video, but in general, we'll get a little more specific to situations within Livingston, and then really talk about advocating for creating a utility to give us the financial resources to be able to manage, maintain, and operate a stormwater system in Livingston. And I know it's you know, when we talk about utilities and creating utility rates and increasing people's bills, that's something that you know, can be challenging, especially with people on limited budgets. But I think generally when you look at the really the effect of having an established stormwater system and treating our stormwater before it enters our receiving streams, I think our community illustrated with basically helping fund a $19 million wastewater treatment plant. I think stormwater treatment really can be looked in the same light. So I'm optimistic that city residents and even county residents within close proximity of Livingston will overwhelmingly support creating a stormwater utility. So that being said, we'll get started. Stormwater, in essence, is just as it sounds. It's water from a storm. Any precipitation that falls from the sky, including rain, hail, snow, is considered stormwater. In general, there are two fates for falling stormwater. In a natural landscape without development, stormwater is absorbed into the ground or falls into bodies of water through creeks and or streams or tributaries. This gives needed water to plants and animals that replenishes reserves of surface and groundwater. In contrast, in an urban landscape, stormwater falls into impervious surfaces that do not absorb water, such as asphalt, concrete, roofs, parking lots, that is not soaked up into the ground. As a result, the water accumulates and flows across these surfaces as runoff. Next slide, please. So local streets, ditches, and gullies are conduits for runoff during stormwater events or spring melting. Water picks up pollutants as it travels on those impervious surfaces, and that contaminated stormwater ends in our streams, creeks, and rivers. As we all know, Fleshman Creek, Billman Creek, and Livingston Ditch, their ultimate discharge point is ultimately the Yellowstone River, and I think that's what we all love about our community is the river. And unfortunately, in the case for Livingston, all the stormwater that our community collects ultimately makes it to the Yellowstone River. In some cases, in the impervious surfaces, or pervious surfaces, I should say, some of that stormwater does recharge our groundwater. So in our city parks and green and open spaces, that snow melt or rain event accumulation could potentially resurface our recharge our aquifer. Next slide. Why is stormwater important to us? And again, I think the photos on this slide really tell the story of another reason why we all love to live here. I think in general, most people from Park County and Livingston, we all want to be good stewards of our environment. You know, we all realize that stormwater or flow of water, even in our creeks and ditches, ultimately enters into the river. And I think we all care about the quality of that water and its effect on the Yellowstone. We know how important the Yellowstone is to Livingston. It provides community recreation, irrigation water for our ranchers and farmers, fish populations and wildlife habitat, which I know we all talk about often. So there's some other effects of stormwater outside of some of the positive things that we previously discussed, but things that we've experienced in Livingston because we do not have an established stormwater system would be flooding or property damage during larger rain events or even snow events where we have, say, a heavy accumulation of snow in February or March, and the ground is still frozen, and then we have a nice warm spring day like we have today, and a lot of that snow melts and does not permeate into the ground because it's frozen, and it makes its way down gradient, and in some cases makes its way into Livingston from higher elevations to the north of town. Another thing, a negative component to stormwater is we have a fair amount of the stormwater that enters into our sanitary sewer system, which ultimately leads to the wastewater treatment plant or a water reclamation facility. And while on one point it's really nice that it's getting treated, the stormwater does not need to be treated to the extent of sewage does. So there is a kind of a waste of energy and resources in treating that stormwater that enters the sanitary sewer system. Another reason why we're having this discussion is we can all see Livingston growing right in front of our eyes, and cities with populations of over 10,000 fall under what they call an MS4 category under DEQ, or the Department of Environmental Quality's regulations. And an MS4 system basically stands for a municipal separate storm sewer system. And for any city over 10,000, the permit requires the municipality to develop, document, and maintain a stormwater management program to reduce the discharge of pollutants from the system to the maximum extent. Our stormwater system today, and as I briefly discussed earlier, Livingston has a rather robust water distribution, sewer collection, transportation system, but this is a good aerial photo of our stormwater system in Livingston. And as you can see, there are a lot of gaps in Livingston. Fortunately, we've invested a lot of money over the last, especially 3 years, but the last 10 years invested in our downtown. And we have a brand new stormwater system in the B, Main, and 2nd Street corridor of our downtown. But everything outside of that is at least 50 years old, unless it was put in by a developer. And so the limited stormwater you see out near the Star Edition and Discovery Vista, that was a stormwater system required through the subdivision process by the city to manage the stormwater for those subdivisions. So, the stormwater in that location was put in at the developer's cost. Everywhere else was something that the city or the Montana Department of Transportation. So as you see on Gallatin Street and out near Bennett, near where the Public Works facility is, that was something that was put in a collaboration between MDT and the city. So really what I want everybody to gather off of this particular slide is we have a lot of work to do to put in a comprehensive system in Livingston. The other thing that I think of special note on this slide is if you look at the railroad tracks in Park Street as kind of the divider between the north side of town and the south side of town, we only have one stormwater pipe that collects water from the north side of town and transfers it under the tracks down B Street, ultimately into Fleshman Creek, and that is the underpass. And I know in the 8 years that I've been here, the city's received a lot of criticism for if we've had a significant rain event, the underpass flooding. And I know there's been concerns about emergency access to the north side due to that flooding. And I think the fire chief and the police chief have done a good job of addressing those concerns. But, you know, in essence, the stormwater system in the underpass was put in, you know, in the 19 teens and the 1920s. And it is way undersized. You know, the amount of development on the north side of Livingston in the early 1900s was very, very limited. And so, believe it or not, the inlets in the underpass are served by only an 8-inch pipe that collects that water. And today, in today's standards, the minimum size storm sewer pipe that we would install in Livingston would be a 15-inch pipe. So, and the capacity for an 8-inch versus a 15 really is exponentially based on the radius of the pipe. So, you know, a 15-inch pipe can hold almost 4 times the amount of water that an 8-inch pipe could. So, now, obviously, there's challenges with the location of the underpass and being directly under, you know, the rail line that MRL uses and BNSF. So that's going to be a real challenge to ultimately upsize those 8-inch pipes to larger pipes. What we've proposed is actually doing another crossing near Yellowstone Street, and we can talk about that later when we get into creating a utility and creating a fund to be able to put in new infrastructure or operate and maintain our current. Next slide, please. Just an example of what we were talking about earlier. An 8-inch pipe can only handle so much water at a time, and that's really what we have to deal with in the underpass. And you know, our crews typically respond immediately, but you know, as we get significant spring rains, you know, this will be a common occurrence, unfortunately, until we can upsize the storm sewer piping that's connected to the underpass. You do next slide. Another situation again where lack of stormwater improvements, collection system results in flooding of city streets. Next slide. So this is a public works director's worst nightmare. I can tell everyone that this is the event that happened in the spring of 2014. I had not even been in my position for a year. And this is in the alley between 7th and 8th Street, north of Chinook, and or up near Summit, between Summit and Chinook. And I was told that this had only happened one time in the previous 20 years. This stormwater was a result of a very warm March day, and we had a considerable amount of snow up above. If everybody's familiar with where Ridgeview subdivision is, north of Livingston, north of Northtown, out near Meredith Ranch Road, and that area, the snow at that 7,000 foot elevation all basically flash melted in the matter of hours, and all that storm water ran down into the city and ultimately made its way into the Livingston ditch, which posed another problem. On one hand, we were excited that it basically stopped the flow to any location further south than where the ditch was, but due to the winter conditions, all the culverts on the Livingston ditch there to the east were all plugged. So we were frantically trying to open up culverts and allow the flow of that water to flow east of town and out near where I would say Sleeping Giant Estates and out near Willow Creek Road, where the ditch flows out that direction. So So if this was the first in 20 years, I must have drawn a short straw on my 8 years of being here. This has happened 2 other times, but not to the extent of what happened in 2014. So next slide, please. This was 2014 as well. And again, this was all snow melt, but in this situation, this was Fleshman Creek, and this is out near in front of Town and Country. And so about 3 days after we had the water in the alley from the previous slide, that snow accumulation in the upper Fleshman Creek watershed started to flash melt. And again, the channel itself was still frozen. And this was the cause of that excess amount of snow melt at Park Street. And this is largely due to the culvert being under Park Street being undersized and not being able to handle that capacity of stormwater. Next slide. This is one that with anyone with children probably sees after each event, rain event we have. This is back behind Sleeping Giant and East Side Elementary. So another situation where we do have some curb and gutter there and a nice roundabout, but there are no stormwater inlets or no channels for that excess rainwater to be able to drain to Fleshman Creek, which is relatively close by. Next slide. A few other locations around town. Again, this really goes back to the citywide map and the very limited amount of storm drain inlets and storm drain piping Livingston has. And these are all, I feel, are justifications on why creating a stormwater utility is necessary. So we have all these areas identified, and they're certainly very fixable if we put in a more comprehensive system citywide. Next slide. As I said before, very, very obvious. City, I think, has been very aggressive in fixing up our downtown. Not a lot of people know, but we've invested $6 million in infrastructure improvements in the downtown since 2017. We have replaced all the water and sewer mains in the downtown. We've replaced all of the stormwater system, and without a stormwater utility, basically the city's paid for all of the stormwater improvements in the downtown by a 50-50 split between sewer funds and street maintenance district funds to do the work in the downtown. So, but this is just an example of how a stormwater system would look underground, where you have the inlet and the concrete structure that the workers are on, and then you have the underground piping that actually transfers that stormwater from one location to the next. And in this case, ultimately down to Fleshman Creek, where it enters a storm scepter, and the sand, grits, and oils from that stormwater are separated before the clean stormwater enters into Fleshman Creek. Next slide. So this is again kind of the nuts and bolts of a residential type stormwater system. As you can see, the lawn area off to the left side of the slide, you know, that's certainly a pervious area. So, you know, most of the groundwater or rainwater is going to saturate in that and make the lawns nice and green. If there is some excess, certainly it'll run over the sidewalk and then end up in the boulevard. And in most cases, our rain events, most of that stormwater that's created on a single family lot or a single residential lot rarely makes it out to the street. But as you can see, with our streets being 38 feet wide, there's a lot of impervious surface there for stormwater to collect. The way that our streets are graded, that stormwater makes its way over into the curb and gutter, and then the curb and gutter is graded to ultimately channel that stormwater into an inlet if there's an established system nearby. So this is the type of scenario that we certainly want to see. And if you want to take a drive around town, I would say that the Northtown development up on Scenic Trail and Sweetgrass Lane, there's a really good illustration of a stormwater system that we'd like to see for every development moving forward within the city. You have this situation, and then you have actually stormwater retention ponds that the water from the inlets actually collects and it infiltrates into the ground in that manner. So next slide. In the downtown, more commercial setting, this is a similar or a kind of a frequent situation where you have the roof drain spouts, sidewalk chases, and that stormwater collects off the roof, down the roof drain, downspout, underneath the sidewalk chase, out into the street, curb and gutter, and then wherever the low point of that curb in the street is where that ultimately is going to run to. Next slide. This is pretty sure the Livingston ditch, and just another way that we can transfer stormwater in the ditch itself, and the way it transfers and travels underneath our city streets would be a standard culvert like this. Next slide. All right. So back on the discussion on the residential setup with the lawn, the sidewalk, boulevard, curb and gutter, inlet. So where you have stormwater inlets, you typically have, you will always have piping underground. In the case of, say, the Northtown development, all of those inlets collect and are piped into a stormwater, it's a retention or a detention pond. And this is the detention pond that is at the corner of 8th and Summit Street. Just another example of a stormwater improvement in Livingston. Next slide. All right, exciting. Very proud to have been able to afford and install this feature. This is our one and only storm scepter. It is located on Main Street, basically out in front of the Livingston Enterprise. And again, this is the only treatment structure for stormwater we have in Livingston right now. And I certainly would like to see several more of these installed in discharge and stormwater discharges near, say, Fleshman Creek, or even up near the lagoon area where we have stormwater collection networks in those locations. But as you can see in the top right, the stormwater flows through that. It more or less kind of does the centrifugal force of the water circulating in that, separates the sands and grits and the heavier solids, and then in that same process, your lighter oils, greases will float up to the top and collect. And with the amount of stormwater we get and the snow maintenance in the wintertime with putting sand, salt sand, and ice slicer and things, we typically have to clean this at least twice a year, more often 3 times a year, since it's was installed in 2018. So there is certainly a maintenance component having structures like this, but it's definitely well worth the investment. Next slide. So this touches home a little bit on our growth policy. You know, right now, I think we're sitting around 8,000. According to the 2020 census estimate, we're around 8,100. I think in the growth policy, I think there's been a general agreement that we're looking at a 2% growth rate. So, you know, we're not that far off from being required under the MS4 category for DEQ, and for that in itself, I think it's good for our community to be talking about stormwater, and I'm hoping within the next year or so, you know, the commission can weigh in on looking at creating a stormwater utility so we can create some revenue to manage and operate a stormwater system. Next slide. I don't really need to get into a lot of detail on these next. It's really, again, this was towards the commission, and you know, I want to make sure there's ample time to answer any questions. But you know, I think our recommendation as far as creating a utility and what that rate would look like, you know, it would be really great if we had $300,000 to work with, and that $300,000 would initially be used to in 3 categories, and that would be for obviously routine maintenance of our existing system and operating costs, and then certainly setting aside some of that money for capital projects, new improvements. You know, how we do that obviously would be with utility rates on a monthly basis. And then certainly if we create a stormwater utility, we would make sure that any new development or new builds, there would be an impact fee associated with that as well. So next slide. And this just some scenarios on how average monthly stormwater utilities for other municipalities in Montana are handled, and you can kind of see their average monthly rates on the left side. So in general, a relatively modest fee. You know, you see Helena is the least at $3.32 per month, and Kalispell is at $7.59. So we also looked at the fee scenarios specifically for Missoula and Bozeman. Next slide. Probably won't get into a lot of detail on this, so we'll do the next slide. Next slide. So this is the breakdown of our residential customers, and our commercial customers, and this is a little overview of starting out at a $5 for single family, commercial needing to be around $12.50, and assuming that there'd be about $20,000 in impact fees collected. And as you can see, this is a 5-year projection on really what those operation, capital improvement, and maintenance costs, how we'd be looking at budgeting for those 3 things. Next slide. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, our big investment in the downtown. These are the specific stormwater improvements that we've spent in the last 3 years in the downtown. And again, not having a dedicated stormwater utility, these fees have been split 50-50 between sewer and street. So You know, another way of looking at this is, you know, last year we spent almost $140,000. Well, very important to do that while we had the streets tore up, and I think certainly provides a huge benefit for our community. But in essence, you know, we weren't able to do $70,000 of street specific improvements and $70,000 of sanitary sewer collection system or treatment system improvement. So next slide. So in 2018, we had TD&H do a stormwater study. We have not presented that to the commission yet, and plan to do that here in the next several months. But these are 3 projects that that came out of that report as recommended improvements, and the cost estimates for each of those. Next slide. Again, when we presented this to the commission, we proposed a 5-step process. Next slide. And I will let everybody know what that 5-step process is here. What we would like to do is we would like to create an inventory of our existing system, which in essence we've done, and continue our capital improvement projects. You know, our downtown improvement project began in 2018. We added stormwater utilities, upgraded curb and gutter, water sewer, new streets, sidewalks. So again, I did mention the stormwater drainage report we had TD&H to do in 2018. We certainly want to present that to the commission and have that accepted as one of our planning documents. Identify and rate priority projects within the existing system in order of repair priority. Develop a preliminary stormwater management plan and enforcement plan. And we'd love to pursue an agreement with the Livingston ditch to be able to utilize the ditch as a stormwater collection tool. Develop a preliminary rate model to collect service fees to pay for repairs projects in a new stormwater utility department, and adopt and implement our stormwater management plan, enforcement plan, and rate model. Establish a new utility department, begin maintenance to the existing system, and maintain and upgrade the system once it's fully funded and functional. So I apologize, it was not a polished presentation, and I know it covered a lot, but I certainly would welcome to answer any questions or that you might have. And again, thank you for the opportunity to present.
Well, thank you, Shannon, so much. It was an awesome presentation and greatly appreciated. I'm going to pass it. Let's see, open it up to some questions. I'm a bit of a fusser here, so let's look to the chat. Let's see. Sarah, do you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, 100%. Shannon, thank you very much. I'm actually excited about stormwater after today, and you've been discussing some of this, and I really think about it in terms of trails and parks. As you know, it's my lens, and permeable pathways from pollution standpoint, as well as a usability. And so my question was on the cost. You know, is there a cost comparison of, let's say, for instance, you know, Alpenglow, if it were to be paved with permeable paving stones instead of being instead of a hard surface? And you know, what is there a cost comparison that you've done on a case study And is one or the other a lot more fiscally responsible? Are they more or less kind of comparable to each other? And then are these permeable surfaces reflected in the growth policy? I hadn't picked up on that, so I thought I would ask that too.
So no, in working with Jesse and the Alpenglow Trail project, I know we did not look at pervious surface options for that. I think the focus of that project was to actually just have a continuation of the paved trail for the O Street connector, you know, go all the way to the hospital. So that was not why I think moving forward, certainly looking at that type of infrastructure is warranted. I think in a situation, certainly at Myers River Trail and out near the hospital, having an 8-foot wide or a 10-foot wide paved surface, really with there should not be any stormwater issues as a result of that. I do know the infiltration rate of the soil in that area is fairly high. But certainly in the downtown setting or more residential, higher density areas, I think certainly looking at porous surfaces needs to be looked at and addressed. I will tell you that it will ultimately be more expensive than just your standard concrete and asphalt that you typically see for those applications.
Thanks, Shannon. And is permeable surfaces and stormwater, are they reflected in the growth policy?
I don't think the growth policy got that specific, but certainly as we as a community move towards creating our stormwater management plan, I think that's going to be you know, a transparent and public process. I think that's truly the document where that needs to find a home in, and I think there's a lot of other options as well on not just having an established storm drain inlet and piping system with storm scepters. I think we can be creative, and I mean, you know, tree wells that collect water off the streets, utilizing boulevard areas, landscaping areas, underground type structures. I think there's a lot of really earth-friendly green type stormwater improvements that we could really look at as a community.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your question, Sarah. Shout out to all the moms in solidarity. Working from home with the babe. Erica, you have some good questions there in the chat. I invite you to unmute. And anybody else, you can put questions in the chat or raise your hand. And then I just also want to share that Shannon has already been quite clear with us. He's got an open door policy, and he's available for questions if you can't think of any today at a later time. So go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. This is really informative. I really enjoyed the presentation. So thanks for being here today. As we've been walking around town, I've been noticing there's some newer multiplexes and sort of this infill development that's happening in a couple areas, one in Green Acres and on the north side of town, which is great to see, you know, the development on existing neighborhoods. I've noticed in some of those, in those newer developments, there's a situation where there's a driveway or a walkway from the front of the house that sort of ends 2/3 of the way from the house. And then there's this gap where there's not curb or gutter or sidewalk or anything. And then it goes to the road. And in fact, we were walking by one of those developments in Green Acres, and the gentleman came out who was building it and said they wanted to do that, but there was some stormwater concerns. And I was just curious if there's like a retrofit or a stormwater action plan for those newer developments, and that's why that is happening. But yeah, I just noticed it all over town, and I was just curious if you had any insight on that.
Well, Erica, I mean, thanks for bringing that to my attention. Historically, these, I'm typically involved when the streets are being built, the water, sewer, when developers, once the subdivision's been approved and the infrastructure is in, that typically is a building and planning exercise, and I really don't get that involved. But I can tell you that the commission recently approved the Public Works Design Standards and Specification Policy, and we really updated a lot of our stormwater requirements in subdivision design. And then more recently, the city commission approved, I think, the last meeting in March, the site plan review process for developments like condos, where now Public Works and building and planning have more authority in design guidelines for developments like that. So historically, there's been gaps in those condo developments in Livingston, and I think we're trying to keep our head above water and have regulations and guidelines that address all issues like stormwater. And I'd like to probably look at the two situations you're talking about in more detail. So if you want to send me an email or give me a call after this Zoom meeting, I'd be happy to look into it more and let you know what I find out.
All right. Thanks so much, Shannon. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, we just have 2 minutes. So Shannon and I, or 1 minute. I'd love to give you the parting words. Anything you'd like to share with folks about, how they can get involved or how they can reach you. And then we'll wrap it up right here at 1.
No, just want to thank PCEC again for having these little informative webinars. Absolutely love the opportunity to educate, inform people about exciting things in Livingston, like our critical infrastructure. With COVID, I haven't been able to do this in the school system, but I've been very fortunate to work with Dave Pettit and his science classes and do little topics on water, sewer, stormwater related stuff. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk stormwater. And my contact information is on our newly updated city website. And don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, we can't thank you enough for all you do for our community, for being here today, for all the late nights, for caring so much about the river. Thank you so much, Shannon. We really appreciate you.
Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day and enjoy the sunshine.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.
Right.